As Americans, we want to believe that the people who stand in front of microphones and promise to defend us are the ones holding the line. That the oath sworn before the nation means something sacred. But when a member of Congress turns that oath into a weapon, when the laws meant to protect communities become the armor shielding a cartel, the threat does not slip through the cracks. It walks straight through the front door of our own democracy. At 5:11 a.m., the outskirts of Marietta, Georgia, were wrapped in the kind of heavy, unmoving quiet that arrives just before a storm breaks. Along a private, oak-lined drive sat a sprawling brick estate belonging to Congresswoman Elaine Navarro, a rising political figure known for her fiery speeches about public safety reform. Her house glowed faintly under dim security lights. Then the glow vanished as power was cut. A second later, the front door collapsed inward. No warnings, no demands, just federal force, clean and surgical. FBI and DHS tactical units poured into the home like a wave breaking through glass. Infrared beams sliced through hallways. Silent hand signals moved teams from room to room. The thud of boots echoed against polished hardwood floors imported from South America, a detail Navarro loved to mention during fundraisers. In her foyer hung a massive oil portrait of her smiling beneath the U.S. flag, a portrait that swayed dangerously as teams advanced deeper. Upstairs, agents reached the master bedroom. A dresser was shifted aside after one operator noticed scuff marks on the floor that did not match the rest of the room's immaculate symmetry. A pry bar slid into the seam. The panel behind it snapped open with a dry crack. And in that moment, everything Navarro had hidden began to spill into the light. Behind the false wall were 14 kilograms of pharmaceutical-grade fentanyl packaged in sterile white containers, each one labeled in Spanish, with coded identifiers federal analysts would later match to a logistics network stretching from Sinaloa to Atlanta. On a lower shelf sat $3.1 million, pressed so tightly into plastic and heat-sealed wrapping that the bundles looked like building bricks. Next to the cash was a hardened satellite communicator with encrypted channels already active, 2 burner microcards, and a neatly stacked set of policy folders marked draft only. None of those drafts had ever been submitted to Congress. Her tablet lay on a charging pad by the bed, screen glowing faintly. Federal cyber teams remotely bypassed its lock in under 20 seconds. The gallery of encrypted chat logs inside wiped away any doubt that Navarro's crimes went far beyond personal enrichment. In a hidden folder, buried under layers of disguised file paths, investigators found messages with a contact saved under a single letter, M. The metadata told the truth. El Magistrado, a strategist for one of Mexico's most organized criminal factions, a man whose influence had already destabilized parts of Central America. The conversation threads read like operational briefings, shipment windows tied to congressional votes, inspection delays disguised as regulatory disputes, coordination of port slowdowns timed with committee hearings. There was even an instruction advising her to block a technology procurement bill that would have upgraded scanners in Savannah's port. And at the bottom of one thread was the line that chilled even veteran investigators. Your decisions keep the corridor open. Payment released. This was not a politician cutting corners. This was a politician constructing them. Downstairs, in Navarro's private study decorated with signed photographs of presidents and governors, agents discovered a biometric safe embedded beneath the flooring. Inside were 5 passports under different identities, 3 encrypted flash drives, and a handwritten note that read, "If they move early, use V31. Nobody yet understood what V31 meant. Within hours, it would become the key to unraveling the network she built. Forensics swept the house in coordinated waves. Laptops, handwritten schedules, secure drives, shredded documents, personal journals, all cataloged, boxed, and carried out the door. The deeper they searched, the more the illusion of a loyal public servant dissolved. Navarro was not helping a cartel infiltrate the system. She was shaping the system around its needs, adjusting policies like gears in a machine she believed she controlled. The Congresswoman was found in her home office, sitting perfectly still in a leather chair, as if waiting for the knock she always feared would come. When agents entered, she did not protest, shout, or deny. She did not ask for a lawyer. She asked only one question, quiet and rattled. Who warned you? In that moment, agents understood that she had not been surprised to be caught, only surprised that anyone had the power to reach her. She had believed that Georgia was her territory, her shield, her stage. As the first sunlight touched the roofs of Marietta, federal SUVs filled the long driveway. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, reporters began to gather, and in the center of it all, Congresswoman Elaine Navarro, sworn to protect the American people, was led out in handcuffs while teams loaded crates of evidence into waiting vans. But the items found inside that house were only the surface. Because when analysts cross-referenced her encrypted files with federal legislative systems, travel logs, and committee activities, they uncovered something far more dangerous than money or drugs. They uncovered a political architecture designed to give a cartel not just access to America, but influence over it. Stay watching. The next discovery is the part none of them were ever supposed to see. What investigators found inside Navarro's house was alarming, but it was only the first layer, the thin paint covering a structure built with far more precision than anyone expected from a single member of Congress. The moment the evidence crates reached the Hoover building and analysts began decrypting her devices, the truth unfolded with a cold, methodical clarity. Navarro had not been bribed to assist a cartel. She had been constructing legislative scaffolding for it, shaping the American system from within, brick by brick, until the corridors were strong enough to move product without triggering alarms. Her tablet held the first clues, but the real revelations came when investigators accessed her cloud backups. Every encrypted chat with El Magistrado synced across mirrored storage accounts, revealing years of communication. It became clear that their relationship was not a recent descent into corruption, but a long-term partnership. Messages referenced earlier corridors, retired alliances, and long-form strategy, suggesting she had been involved long before she took office. Some exchanges were written in a language only the two of them appeared to understand, mixing legislative jargon with cartel code phrases in a way that only someone with deep knowledge of both systems could construct. Financial analysts began tracing Navarro's transactions, and within hours, a pattern too precise to be coincidence emerged. More than $62 million had traveled through Georgia-based advocacy groups she publicly supported. On paper, these groups worked on infrastructure policy and supply chain research. In reality, they existed almost exclusively to receive funds from offshore consulting firms in Mexico, Panama, and Belize, companies whose only activity was sending money to the United States and dissolving weeks later. Every dollar was laundered through multiple layers of nonprofits, academic partnerships, and research subcontracts until it reached accounts controlled by individuals tied to Navarro's policy circle. The deeper investigators dug, the more they realized Navarro's influence was not isolated to the legislative floor. She had embedded herself strategically in committees responsible for transportation, port authority oversight, and logistics modernization. Her proposals seemed harmless: improve commercial flow through Georgia's busiest routes, reduce regulatory burdens, increase efficiency in cargo processing. But when these proposals were cross-referenced with shipment data seized from cartel hubs, the timelines aligned perfectly. Every easing of restrictions coincided with a spike in cartel traffic. Every delay in implementing new inspection protocols matched a period when criminal shipments moved through Savannah's port or Atlanta's distribution network. Her amendments were surgical. One bill reduced random inspections during specific night hours, which investigators later discovered matched the cartel's preferred arrival windows. Another created a review process that forced ports to provide advanced notice before increasing scrutiny, effectively giving traffickers a countdown to reroute shipments. A third bill she championed restricted the installation of high-energy scanners in several southeastern facilities, citing budget concerns. But internal emails showed she privately convinced colleagues to vote against the equipment long before the cost analysis was complete. Travel logs revealed even more troubling patterns. Navarro had attended dozens of unreported private meetings with regional officials across Georgia, as well as in South Carolina, Alabama, and Florida. Many of these meetings took place near ports, industrial yards, or logistics centers later identified as cartel-linked sites. One such meeting occurred in a Savannah restaurant, whose owner was later confirmed to be an intermediary for cartel financing. Another was held at a secluded lakeside lodge near Augusta, where Navarro spent 5 hours behind closed doors with a group of local business leaders who operated freight companies with incomplete ownership disclosures. Within months of those meetings, each of those companies received expedited federal clearance for expanded cargo operations. Investigators pulled personnel files from various agencies and found 17 officials who had quietly approved zoning changes favoring warehouse construction in areas that later became key distribution points in the cartel's southeastern pipeline. When these officials were questioned, many claimed they had no idea who funded the projects. Some said they were pressured indirectly. Others said they thought they were helping with economic development. But emails recovered from Navarro's devices revealed coordination that destroyed any plausible deniability. She had recommended these individuals for committees, endorsed their applications, or vouched for their proposals in state-level meetings. The final revelation in this phase of the investigation came from a folder labeled Future Pathways. Inside were long-term strategic outlines she had created with El Magistrado. These documents mapped future shipment routes, predicted infrastructure legislation, and even listed potential political candidates who, in her words, understand the vision. One section described plans to reduce oversight at several key intermodal facilities by 2026, effectively clearing a path for cartel expansion. Another document proposed shifting millions in federal grants toward transportation contractors, who were later revealed to be shells for cartel intermediaries. The chilling detail was not the scale of the plan, but its confidence. Navarro wrote as though her position in Congress made her untouchable, as though the laws were clay in her hands, and the public would never see the fingerprints she left behind. She had engineered blind spots so elegant that even seasoned investigators admitted they might never have noticed them, if not for the raid. By evening, the realization inside federal command centers was absolute. Navarro had not joined a cartel. She had built them a political exoskeleton, a legislative shield wrapped around criminal operations that stretched from the Gulf to the eastern seaboard. And for years, the nation had mistaken her influence for leadership. If you are still watching, stay focused. The next phase is where the government stops unraveling her architecture and begins tearing it down piece by piece. Operation High Anchor is about to ignite across 9 states, and what it reveals will shock even those who already believe corruption runs deep. By the time investigators finished mapping the full extent of Navarro's legislative engineering, it was clear that uncovering her role was only the beginning. The network she helped build was still alive, still operating, and still moving product across the Southeast under the cover of the very laws she had crafted. The government had no choice but to strike at every point simultaneously. They called it Operation High Anchor, a multi-state sweep designed to break the spine of the cartel's eastern corridor in a single coordinated hit. At 4:47 a.m., long before the sun touched Georgia's horizon, federal command centers across 9 states lit up with synchronized directives. Screens flickered, radios crackled. Tactical teams moved like shadows across tarmacs, piers, train yards, and warehouse districts. Helicopters rose in near silence, their blades cutting the humid southern air as if slicing through the secrecy that had protected the network for years. In Savannah, the operation started with a single coded transmission. Within seconds, unmarked SUVs rolled down a deserted strip near the port's northern gate. The buildings ahead looked abandoned, empty shells of corrugated steel. But intelligence pulled from Navarro's encrypted files told a different story. These structures were not storage units. They were processing points, hidden in plain sight. When agents breached the side entrance, they found industrial tables coated in chemical residue, sealed drums marked with falsified agricultural labels, and a rail of metal trays containing powder samples that matched fentanyl signatures recorded in Mexican labs. Workers tried to escape through a loading dock, but a perimeter of drones tracked their every movement, locking them in place like prey under a spotlight. 200 miles west, in the outskirts of Columbus, a second strike unfolded inside a logistics facility registered to a company Navarro had championed publicly during her re-election campaign. On the surface, it was a standard freight operation. Trucks lined the lot, forklifts hummed. But inside the warehouse, behind a row of stacked pallets, agents discovered a concealed corridor leading to a room built with reinforced steel walls. Inside that room were tables, digital scales, industrial sealers, and a massive blueprint of intermodal routes tracing pathways from the Gulf up through Georgia, Alabama, the Carolinas, and into the Northeast. It was the same map analysts had found in Navarro's Future Pathways folder, now brought into tangible form. 3 armed guards tried to hold their ground, but the confrontation was over in seconds. It wasn't a firefight, it was an execution of precision. In Jacksonville, Florida, a companion strike hit a warehouse Navarro had visited under the guise of a supply chain innovation tour. The front office still held glossy brochures about economic development, but deeper inside, agents found cold storage units retrofitted with internal compartments, welded into place, and insulated with lead sheets to interfere with scanning systems. Some of the units were still running, their frost-lined walls humming faintly. Inside them were dozens of brick-shaped packages, each stamped with a black insignia federal analysts recognized immediately, markings from the same supplier whose shipments Navarro had shielded through her committee votes. The largest confrontation unfolded in the industrial outskirts of Atlanta. This location had been flagged in Navarro's encrypted chats as primary. Teams approached just before sunrise, slipping through shadows behind rows of shipping containers. The air smelled of diesel and metal. A freight hub nearby masked the noise of tactical vehicles. When the breach command sounded, agents stormed a 2-story building disguised as a distribution office. They found far more than a workspace. The entire structure was a command center for coordinating shipments across multiple states. Clean whiteboards recorded schedules with coded symbols. Laptops displayed financial transaction dashboards. Burner phones were lined neatly on a steel table, each one labeled with a location name investigators later matched to cartel outposts. A man attempted to flee through a second-floor window, but a K-9 unit intercepted him before he made it 10 feet. Throughout the operation, seizures piled up with staggering speed, narcotics stacked in hidden compartments, firearms stored in temperature-controlled vaults, cash bundled in tight rows beneath false flooring, crypto wallets recovered from secure servers. But the most explosive discovery came not from drugs or weapons, but from paperwork found in a locked filing cabinet at a New Jersey site that had quietly been incorporated into Navarro's corridor. Inside was a folder labeled simply "Clearance." It contained monthly payment ledgers written in clean block letters, each entry corresponding to specific 8-hour windows, during which inspections were minimized at various ports and transport hubs. Several entries were annotated with a name code. The realization spread through command centers with the force of a shockwave. Navarro had not merely given legislative cover, she had personally authorized inspection windows, telling the cartel exactly when and where the system would be vulnerable. Across the Southeast, the aftermath was immediate and overwhelming. Agents processed suspects cuffed and lined against warehouse walls. Helicopters ferried seized evidence to temporary forensic stations. Officials from multiple states received urgent calls, informing them that properties they had approved, companies they had vouched for, and projects they had funded were part of a criminal pipeline that ran deeper and more efficiently than any of them had imagined. Communities woke to the sight of flashing lights sweeping across industrial parks, ports, and rail yards. News helicopters circled overhead. Reporters spoke in fast, breathless tones, unsure whether they were covering a criminal operation or the collapse of an unseen political infrastructure. By early afternoon, the numbers from the sweep were so massive they barely sounded real. Multi-ton seizures, hundreds of weapons, millions in cash and assets, dozens of officials either detained or under immediate investigation. And hovering beneath it all, a truth no longer avoidable. Navarro's political influence had not just protected the cartel, it had allowed it to evolve. What Operation High Anchor exposed was not a drug pipeline, it was a system built with votes, reinforced with policy, and shielded by a woman who believed she could bend the government to her will without ever being caught. The shock waves from Operation High Anchor did not stop at the warehouse walls. They surged outward, ripping through city halls, county offices, state agencies, and the polished corridors of Washington with a force no one was prepared to face. What began as a dawn raid in Georgia had become a national reckoning. The country was no longer asking what Elaine Navarro had done. It was asking how many people had helped her do it. By the second morning after the operation, the Georgia state capitol was surrounded by news trucks. Reporters swarmed the steps, firing questions at every official who dared to exit the building. Inside, emergency sessions stretched into the night as legislators tried to understand how one of their own had managed to infiltrate the machinery of governance so deeply without ever triggering alarms. Staffers whispered in hallways. Doors closed with unusual force. Phones buzzed in frantic bursts. Everyone feared the same thing. Who would fall next? In Washington, committees Navarro once dominated now sat half empty. Several of her closest allies requested medical leave. 2 abruptly resigned without explanation. Others avoided cameras like they carried contagion. The House Ethics Committee announced an urgent internal review. Anonymous leaks suggested multiple members had received undisclosed contributions from nonprofits linked to Navarro's funding web. For the first time in years, voices trembled inside chambers where confidence usually reigned. Across Georgia, the consequences grew even more visible. County officials scrambled to explain why zoning approvals they once celebrated now appeared to have been part of a criminal lattice. A transportation commissioner in Savannah admitted under questioning that he had approved changes under political pressure, though he would not say from whom. In Augusta, a regional port authority director abruptly shut down operations for a full audit, triggering panic among business leaders who suspected something larger was lurking beneath the surface. Communities that once admired Navarro now felt betrayed. In Marietta, residents gathered outside her district office, staring at the locked doors, as though trying to reconcile the smiling campaign banners still hanging in the windows with the woman they had watched being led away in handcuffs. Parents stood silently. Veterans folded their arms. Volunteers who once knocked on doors for her campaign walked past reporters without speaking. A man holding an American flag asked a question that echoed across social media by nightfall. If someone like her can be bought, what chance do the rest of us have? Meanwhile, federal analysts continued sorting through the evidence seized during Operation High Anchor. What they pieced together was even worse than initial reports. Navarro's legislation had not merely shaped conditions for cartel operations. It had protected financial arteries, muted oversight, shifted priorities, and created blind zones across multiple agencies. Internal emails showed bureaucratic delays that traced back to offices she influenced. Case files revealed investigations abruptly halted without explanation. In one chilling instance, a whistleblower from a Georgia port authority had filed concerns about suspicious cargo movement, only to be reassigned the next week with no justification. Navarro's encrypted chats referenced the incident with cold detachment. Noise handled. The realization spreading through federal command centers was grim. Navarro had not just corrupted the system. She had taught it how to ignore itself. When she finally reappeared publicly, it was inside a federal courthouse in Atlanta. Cameras swarmed as she was escorted past a wall of microphones. Navarro kept her eyes down, her expression flat, unchanging, almost vacant. The same woman who once delivered passionate speeches with practiced charisma now moved as though her voice had been removed, along with her power. She did not speak, did not gesture, did not look at the crowd, but her silence was louder than anything she could have said. It was the silence of someone who knew the weight of the evidence against her did not require defense. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors outlined a preliminary version of the case. They described a system Navarro had built piece by piece, forging alliances with cartel intermediaries, manipulating legislative processes, and embedding vulnerabilities into national infrastructure. They spoke of financial webs spanning 9 states, of coded communication passing through encrypted channels, of intentional delays in federal oversight. The judge listening to the briefing paused more than once, visibly stunned by the scale. Outside, the country grappled with the reality that corruption did not just seep through cracks. It could be engineered from the inside by someone sworn to prevent it. Commentators argued on television. Community leaders held emergency forums. Citizens demanded transparency, demanding to know how many other corridors had been built quietly under the cover of public service. And yet, amid the chaos, a different truth emerged. Operation High Anchor had not only revealed corruption, it had revealed the resolve of those willing to confront it. Investigators who followed threads no one else saw. Agents who moved before dawn. Analysts who traced every dollar, every vote, every coded message until the whole structure collapsed under its own weight. In the end, the real cost of Navarro's betrayal was not measured in narcotics or money. It was measured in trust. Trust broken, trust sold, trust quietly dismantled behind closed doors while the public believed the system still stood intact. When the law bends for one, it weakens for all. And when the gatekeeper becomes the architect of the breach, the danger spreads far beyond any single crime scene. But this story is also a reminder that exposure is stronger than silence. That once the truth is dragged into the open, it cannot be forced back into the shadows. And if you are still watching, still listening, still refusing to look away from what others try to dismiss, then you are part of the side that demands accountability, no matter how high it reaches. Justice does not begin in the halls of Congress. It begins in the willingness of people to see what is in front of them, and to refuse to let it stand.